Welcome back to Black Bear News, where we are discussing deeply concerning environmental issues, otherwise known as abrupt climate change, the ongoing destruction of our planet by ourselves. This is what's happening. This is the biggest issue, news story, concern facing the human race and all other species on the planet. So it's not just all about us. It's everything. We are threatening and succeeding in taking down everything. And this is real. This is really happening. Again, as I was stating yesterday, these are verifiable happenings. So, and that's what this channel is about, is giving you ample evidence, ample and abundant evidence of this destruction. And you know, it's not, the magnitude of the problem is just, you know, beyond a lot of people's scope. I mean, there are plenty of things that people are worried about that are very, very worthy things to be worried about, very worthy causes. You know, those that are fighting for civil rights are fighting for an end to oppression, for an end to those with power and wealth to stop stealing from them and making it their fault that they don't have anything. This is basically the goal of anyone fighting against the monster of climate change as well, but with the added layer that we have to not wish to have a portion of what those in power have, but to have everyone, including ourselves, give up what we absolutely don't need in order to live simply on this planet. It's a profoundly spiritual and difficult quest, because it involves asking the very highest of ourselves and of our species. And the question, the real question is, are we worthy of that quest? Are we worthy of the problem that stares us in the face? And I will go ahead and guess what most people think the answer is to that. But I think that's a question that everybody has to ask themselves. Are you worthy of this quest? Are you worthy of this problem? Are you worthy of living up to this challenge? Because it is a challenge like no other. And we all know this is true. I'm going to read some articles. I don't know if I'm going to read every single word of every single article. I think I'm going to try and just hit the mains on most of these, so I can try and get through this information in a timely manner, because I'm trying to publish this video. I'm probably not going to succeed in publishing it before midnight, but whatever. That never stopped me before. So problems arising from the storms that are going on in the Northeast. From the Farmer's Journal, potato crops at risk of frost damage. So this is all over the country, not just the Northeast. Potato crops around the country, which are still in the ground, are at risk of frost damage as low temperatures continue. After days of sustained sub-zero conditions, much of the ground around the country remains frozen. While many farmers used this to their advantage by catching up with late harvest jobs, groundwork, and early cultivations, potato farmers who still have crops in the ground have expressed concern. The IFA's latest stock survey estimates that between 800 and 1,000 acres of potato remain in the ground in the Republic of Ireland. Oh, this is from Ireland. Wait a minute. Hold on. Strike that, reverse that. Anyway, so the poor weather conditions during autumn 2017 meant that ground conditions were difficult throughout the entire potato harvest. I don't know why I assumed this was about the U.S. Anyways, excuse me for that. The poor weather conditions, blah, blah. In many cases, potatoes on heavier, wetter land could not be harvested and remain in the ground today. There was a similar situation in Northern Ireland where last year farmers experienced one of the most challenging harvests in 30 years. Last November, Ulster Farmers Union potato chair Robert Sibbett stated that in some cases, farmers had up to 10% of their potato crops left unharvested. While there was some digging in parts of the country last week, progress has once again stopped with the onset of the Arctic weather. This has prompted concerns that the remaining potato crops may be at risk of frost damage. Potatoes are notoriously frost sensitive. While potato drills offer protection from light frost, prolonged spells of sub-zero conditions will penetrate soil cover and can reach tubers which are close to the surface. Widespread frost throughout the last week saw temperatures dropping to minus 10 C in places. Where snowfall has accumulated in fields, this will act as a layer of natural insulation from frost, and as a result, damage will be minimal. However, melting snow could lead to poor ground conditions. Exposed drills will have felt the brunt of the cold weather, and frost will have been penetrated the soil to depths of between 2 inches and 3 inches. This is deep enough to catch tubers close to the surface. Freezing potato tubers result in the formation of ice crystals within the tissue. Once frozen tissue thaws, it generally discolors quickly from off-white to pink and red, and eventually to brown, gray, or black. These tubers break down rapidly into soft, watery mass, leaving a chalky residue as the water evaporates. All right, so poor weather affecting crops in Ireland. This is, I guess, why I thought I got these two articles mixed up. So this is Winterkill to U.S. wheat, historic record cold, and Bombogenesis. This is from earlier this year, January 2nd. Record cold and very warm Atlantic SSTs may lead to a major snowstorm this week. Explosive cyclogenesis refers to a rapidly deepening extratropical cyclonic low pressure area. The less scientific names for this rare phenomenon are weather bomb, meteorological bomb, explosive development, and bombogenesis, which we actually had this last weekend. Same situation. The next snowstorm to brush the eastern U.S. will hit on Thursday and bring record cold. Most noteworthy, this could be an historic event in terms of establishing the lowest barometric pressure ever observed and recorded. Some areas around Boston, including Cape Cod and even eastern Maine, could see 1 to 2 feet of snow, et cetera, et cetera. What the heck? In addition to the drought expanding, let's see. U.S. wheat crops suffering from drought and cold. In addition to the drought expanding, record cold temperatures probably damaged some U.S. wheat. Therefore, extremely cold weather in the plains combined with worsening drought will likely begin to adversely affect the wheat crop. Yet we expect moisture in the plains by mid-January when spring arrives. If widespread moisture has not occurred across the U.S. grain belt, wheat prices could stage a major rally. There's a graph here of the drought outlook as of late last year across the U.S. Moving on. This is from Rolling Stone, and most likely incredibly long, so I'm not going to read. I'm going to kind of hit some points in this so you get the major idea. By Jeff Goodall, February 25th, 2018. Welcome to the age of climate migration. Extreme weather due to climate change displaced more than 1 million people from their homes last year. It could soon reshape the nation. Hurricane Harvey, which hit Texas and Louisiana last August, causing $125 billion in damage, dumped more water out of the sky than any storm in U.S. history. By one calculation, roughly 1 million gallons fell for every person in Texas. The water rained down on a flat former bayou that had become a concrete and asphalt empire of more than 2.3 million people. Highways turned into rivers and shopping malls into lakes. As the water rose, people scrambled for safe refuge into attics, onto rooftops, and overpasses. A Texas game warden captured a 9-foot-long alligator in the dining room of a home near Lake Houston. Snakes swam into kitchens. A hawk flew into a taxi cab and wouldn't leave. As the deluge continued, tens of thousands of people fled, some in fishing boats, down suburban streets, some in canoes, some on jet skis. Others risked a harrowing drive through water, fallen trees, and swimming dogs. More than 30,000 people ended up in shelters. Thousands more headed up Interstate 45 toward Dallas, where parking lots at IHOPs and McDonald's were full of desperate people wondering how their suburban neighborhoods had turned into Waterworld. Many of them lived in their cars until the floods receded and eventually returned to devastated homes. Some people who hit the road during the storm kept going. A few days after the waters drained away, I was driving across central Arizona on old Route 66, which novelist John Steinbeck called the Mother Road. It was the route that hundreds of thousands of people took to escape America's first man-made environmental catastrophe. Today, the ghosts of the Dust Bowl, the 1930s drought that caused a region roughly the size of Pennsylvania to dry up and blow away, haunt every gas station and roadside ice cream shop. Near Flagstaff, I pulled into a service station and parked next to a Subaru with the words, "We survived Hurricane Harvey, Orange, Texas," scrawled on the back window in bright pink letters. The mud-splattered car was loaded with luggage, boxes, and a guitar case. A middle-aged woman and a scruffy man with wild brown hair pulled themselves out, looking road-weary and haggard. The man popped open the hood and filled it with some wiring. I nodded to the words on the back of the window. How bad was Harvey? Bad, the woman said. She introduced herself as Melanie Elliott. We had to get out of there. It was a fucking disaster, the man said, bent under the hood. His name was Andrew McGowan. We got swamped. Orange, I later learned, is an old industrial seaport near the Louisiana border, population 18,643. The town has been hit repeatedly by recent hurricanes. In 2005, Rita savaged the city. 3 years later, Ike breached the city's levee and flooded the streets with as much as 15 feet of water. 3 people died. We were just dealing with water all the time. Constant flooding, McGowan continued. The whole place is going under. Harvey was it for us, Elliot added. Too much water. We can't deal with this anymore. We are going to San Diego. What are you going to do there? I asked. We don't know, McGowan said. I'm going to play some guitar and see what comes along. As they piled back into their Subaru and headed down the highway, I thought of the old Woody Guthrie song about the farmers fleeing the Dust Bowl. We loaded our jalopies and piled our families in. We rattled down that highway to never come back again. In 2017, a string of climate disasters, 6 big hurricanes in the Atlantic, wildfires in the West, horrific mudslides, high temperature records breaking all over the country, caused $306 billion in damage, killing more than 300 people. After Hurricane Maria, 300,000 Puerto Ricans fled to Florida, and disaster experts estimate that climate and weather events displaced more than 1 million Americans from their homes last year. These statistics don't begin to capture the emotional and financial toll on survivors who have to dig through the ashes and flooded debris to rebuild their lives. Mental health workers often see spikes in depression, PTSD, and suicides in the months that follow a natural disaster. How we are going to see spikes in the future. After Harvey, one study found that 30% of residents in flooded areas had fallen behind on their rent or mortgage. 1 in 4 respondents said that they were having problems paying for food. Politicians inevitably vow to rebuild to make their city stronger than before. But in the coming years, as the climate gets hotter, the seas keep rising, and storms grow more intense, these vows will become less and less credible. Climate change is going to remap our world, changing not just how we live, but where we live. As scientist Peter Glick, co-founder of the Pacific Institute, puts it, there is a shocking, unreported fundamental change coming to the habitability of many parts of the planet, including the USA. In the not-so-distant future, places like Phoenix and Tucson will become so hot that just walking across the street will be a life-threatening event. Parts of the upper Middle West will become a permanent dust bowl. South Florida and low-lying sections of the Gulf Coast will be underwater. Some people may try to stick around and fight it out with Mother Nature, but most will not. People will do what they have done for thousands of years, says Vivek Chandas, professor of urban studies and planning at Portland State University. They will migrate to better climates. Wherever that might be. One recent study in the journal Nature Climate Change predicts that by 2050, as much as 30% of the world's land surface could face desert-like conditions, including large swaths of Asia, Europe, Africa, and southern Australia. More than 1.5 billion people currently live in these regions. In the US, a recent study by Matthew Hauer, a demographer at the University of Georgia, estimates that 30 million people will be displaced by sea level rise alone by the year 2100, about the number of African Americans who moved out of the South during the Great Migration of the 20th century. In Hauer's study, about 2.5 million people will flee the region that includes Miami, Fort Lauderdale, and West Palm Beach. Greater New Orleans loses up to 500,000 people. The New York City area loses only 50,000. The biggest winners are nearby cities on high ground with mild climates, good infrastructure, and strong economies. Atlanta, Austin, Madison, Wisconsin, and Memphis. Most people don't realize how much climate affects everything from their property values to how hard people work, said Solomon Siang, professor of public policy at the University of California, Berkeley, who led a recent study that predicts as the climate warms, there will be a large transfer of value northward and westward. And the wealthy who can afford to adapt will benefit, while the poor who will likely be left behind will suffer. If we continue on the current path, Siang says, our analysis suggests that climate change may result in the largest transfer of wealth from the poor to the rich in the country's history. The Southeast will be the biggest loser due to damage from increased flooding, higher heat mortality, and lower agricultural yield. In some of the poorest countries in the region, the study predicts income will fall by up to 1/3. In contrast, the Northwest will see increased agricultural yields, lower energy costs due to milder winters, and higher worker productivity. The lesson of this study is the future looks good for the Pacific Northwest, especially cities west of the Cascades, like Seattle and Portland, says Siang's co-author Amir Jina, an economist at the University of Chicago. For the Southeast, it's not a very pretty picture. There are plenty of unknowns and how this will all play out, including unforeseen climate tipping points, technological innovations that help us adapt, and outbreaks of war and disease. But without a doubt, climate change is not only altering the physical boundaries of our world, it is challenging the very 20th century idea that we can engineer our way out of whatever chaos comes our way. The big lesson of this century may be that we cannot. Ding. As the seas rise and the temperatures soar, we will have to give up ground. We will learn that retreat is not a dirty word, and we will become more and more a nation of refugees. See how much deeper I want to get into this article. But this is raising some incredibly great points here that, you know, as the disasters hit and as we attempt to rebuild, which we always do, at some point somebody needs to ask the question, why? And why aren't we already making haste to migrate out of certain cities and areas like Miami? Miami's almost done, and New Orleans is not far behind. And why anybody is investing money or even, planning on a long-term future in either of these cities is absolute positive madness. Let's see. At about 5 p.m. on August 29th, 2005, Hurricane Katrina broke through the levee protecting New Orleans' lower Ninth Ward. 10 feet of raging seawater tore into this working-class black neighborhood, trapping people in their homes without warning. About 80 people were killed by the storm in the lower Ninth, the highest flood fatality rate in the city. Virtually every structure in the 25-square-block neighborhood was destroyed. The lower Ninth was ground zero, but Katrina devastated a wide area in and around New Orleans. About 1,800 people died. Another 400,000 were displaced. This wave of displaced people became known as the Katrina diaspora. And researchers are still trying to come to grips with exactly what impact it had on the demographics of the city. By most measures, New Orleans is thriving again, but it is a richer, whiter city than it had been before the storm. It is also smaller. The population of New Orleans today is about 390,000, roughly 100,000 fewer people than before Katrina hit. In the lower Ninth, rebuilding has been difficult. Despite hundreds of millions of dollars in aid, large parts of the neighborhood are still abandoned. Empty lots, sidewalks that lead nowhere, trash blowing in the streets. New Orleans official statistics estimate that the population of the lower Ninth is 37% of what it was before Katrina. But Laura Paul, founder of lower9.org, a nonprofit devoted to rebuilding the neighborhood, contends the reality is much closer to 25%. The federally funded storm recovery program made it almost impossible for homeowners there to get enough money to rebuild, she says. Instead, many people took their measly settlements and started over elsewhere. And they may be smarter for that move. Every impediment to recovery that could have been thrown up in the path of low-wealth Black families was thrown up, Paul says. It was basically a form of institutionalized racism. Still, there are hopeful signs. More than 100 pastel-colored, solar-powered homes built by Brad Pitt's Make It Right Foundation, 85 or so more traditional houses rebuilt with the sweat of volunteers from organizations like lower9.org. We are absolutely committed to the long-term future of this neighborhood for as many pre-Katrina residents as wish to return, says Paul. But given the risks that New Orleans faces from rising seas and increasingly intense storms, that long-term future is in question. When I bring this up, she balks. Worrying about the future is a luxury for privileged people. My friends here are worried about putting dinner on the table tonight, not what is going to happen in the city 20 or 30 years from now. Okay, let's stop right there. And this is why the narrow focus of an issue that's in your face right now, an issue of survival, which of course is, always what people are confronted with in the moment. The narrow issue of survival is blocking out the bigger issue of inevitable non-survival or perishment. And that's like everything that happened in Katrina and everything that's still happening in New Orleans post Katrina is definitely institutionalized racism and shaped by that institutionalized racism. But there's a bigger problem. The bigger problem is that Katrina was, many scientists agree that Katrina was most likely climate change, helped along by climate change, made worse by climate change, that it was a climate change catastrophe, one of the first of many. And, the really broader picture would be the bigger long-term solution to places like New Orleans and Miami would be to, admit that there is a problem admit that there is a problem coming in the future, very soon in the future, maybe not 20 or 30 years from now, maybe 5 or 10 years from now. And why are we letting people just, of course, the poor aren't going to be able to leave. The rich are going to be able to get the hell out, and the poor are going to be stuck there, and they're going to suffer. So if we're talking about, if we're really talking about helping people who are less well off, if we're really talking about economic justice, and racial justice and civil rights issues, we should be talking about, I mean, obviously it means admitting that we're going to have to evacuate these cities. It means admitting that we're going to have to lose ground to climate change. It means admitting that we have a major problem on our hands. And so, again, we can't admit if we can't admit there's a problem, we cannot face the problem. So what is going to happen, because we cannot admit that there's a problem, is that we're going to try to rebuild Katrina. We're going to have poor people trying to hang on in Miami while all the rich people have already left, and they are absolutely going to get clobbered, because people cannot admit the truth. White people and black people cannot admit the truth. That's a major problem. So it takes truth-telling on all sides. It takes everyone to tell this truth. It takes, if you are black, if you are brown, if you are poor, if you are not in a good financial position and you live in one of these cities, get the hell out. Do whatever you can. Don't buy a house. Don't try to, regrow your roots there. Don't try, just, take this knowledge from me to you, move away. Take what, if you don't have much, pack that not much up into a truck and get out and start over somewhere else, because, many people from New Orleans ended up in Houston, only to see themselves in another situation like Katrina. But that is probably, in a long-term scenario, that is the best thing and the wisest thing that you can do is, if you have family elsewhere, if you have people elsewhere, if you have any kinds of means at all, to get you and your loved ones out of New Orleans or Miami in the next 5 years, do it. You should do it. Seriously. Don't hang on. Don't hold on. Nostalgia is a bitch, but just, I know that people have, roots and families there for generations and generations. That's not going to matter. It's not going to matter to climate change. It's not going to matter to the next hurricane. It's not going to matter to the next storm surge. That's going to wipe you out. So the end on that. I'm going to move on to some, I'm going to link that article below because it's long and there's lots of, I'm positive there's also lots of other good things in there. I'm going to move on to some political news, some sandbox news. And I'm going to preface this with a comment from Colgano on my video from 3/1, March 1st, gaslighting, state mind control, and abusive narcissism. I really like Alm's comments, and one of the better commenters on this channel, and I don't really get a chance to read many of his comments, but this is his comment in response to that. It's a fire sale and everything must go. Can't leave all the fun up to Uncle Sam and Papa Putin. And this ain't even mentioning the tinderbox situation going on between India and Pakistan. To emphasize, both nuclear powers, by the way, to emphasize the Indian fears over the last month, at least 11 China Navy ships entered the Indian Ocean in the vicinity of the Maldives. This includes a large amphibious large amphibious ships carrying Marines. China is expanding its Marine force from 3 to 7 brigades and building additional amphibious ships to carry and land the Marines a long distance from China. The Chinese Marines are not, in a Western sense, a Marine Corps, but the Chinese Marines have come to be considered elite troops, and for that reason, Chinese Army brigades consider it an honor to be converted to Marine units. This first occurred in 1980, with the second conversion in 1998, and the third in 2017. This expansion for the Marines, as well as the number of amphibious ships, indicates that China is preparing to expand and defend overseas territory. This is already underway in the South China Sea, and India fears there are islands in the Indian Ocean that may be next. On the Tibet border, China is building up its military forces, especially air defense and warplanes. On their side of the border, India is doing the same on their side, and both sides appear to be getting ready for another confrontation over Indian territorial claims on the Doklam Plateau. A 2017 confrontation was settled in late August. The two nations blamed each other for this confrontation in a very inhospitable part of the world. The Doklam Plateau is where the Tibet border meets India's Sikkim state. China is also building new roads to this part on the Tibet-India border. China has most of the advantages here, with more roads and bases on their side of the border, 24/7 satellite surveillance of the area, and better communications and electronics in general, plus a track record of China winning and India losing. So the political take from Alam Kalgano to set up this is about Putin's speech the other day, revealing his new weapons. Are you listening, America? This is from March 2nd from TruthDig. This is from Scott Ritter. From 2002 until 2011, Paul Marcarelli, perhaps better known to American audiences as Verizon's test guy, made a career starring in television commercials, wandering the width and breadth of the United States, holding a phone to his ear and asking the simple question, "Can you hear me now?" Verizon was and is in the communications business, in which the ability to send a message is only as good as the corresponding ability to receive it. On Thursday, Vladimir Putin, Russia's much maligned president, delivered his State of the Nation address to the Russian Federal Assembly, the Russian National Legislature consisting of the State Duma, or lower house, and the Russian Council, or upper house. While the first half of his speech dealt with the Russian domestic issues, and any American who has brought into Western media perception that Russia is a collapsing state possessing a failed economy would do well to read this portion of the speech. It was the second half of the presentation that caused the world to sit up and listen. In this portion of the speech, Putin outlined developments in Russian strategic military capability. The developments collectively signal the obsolescence of America's strategic nuclear deterrence, both in terms of its present capabilities and taking into account the 1.2 trillion nuclear weapons modernization program President Trump unveiled earlier this year, anything America might pursue in the decades to come. Some Western observers have derided Putin's speech as simple posturing, a manic effort to project Russia power and with it global credibility, where none exists. Such an interpretation would be incorrect. There should be no doubt among American politicians, military leaders, and citizens alike. Every word has meaning, Putin told his audience. The weapons he referred to are real, and Putin meant every word he said. Back in 2000, he said, the U.S. announced its withdrawal from the anti-ballistic missile treaty. Key points right here. Russia was categorically against this. We saw the Soviet-U.S. ABM treaty signed in 1972 as the cornerstone of the international security system. Together with the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, the ABM treaty not only created an atmosphere of trust, but also prevented either party from recklessly using nuclear weapons, which would have endangered humankind. We did our best to dissuade the Americans from withdrawing from the treaty, all in vain. The U.S. pulled out of the treaty in 2002, Putin observed. Even after that, we tried to develop constructive dialogue with the Americans. We proposed working together in this area to ease concerns and maintain the atmosphere of trust. At one point, I thought that a compromise was possible, but this was not to be. All our proposals, absolutely all of them, were rejected. And then when we said that we have to improve our modern strike systems to protect our security, in reply, the US said that it is not creating a global BMD, ballistic missile defense system, against Russia, which is free to do as it pleases, and that the US will presume that our actions are not spearheaded against the US. Building on his well-known position delivered in the 2005 State of the Nation address that the collapse of the Soviet Union was a major geopolitical disaster of the century that created genuine drama in which the epidemic of disintegration infected Russia itself, Putin said in his 2018 State of the Nation address that apparently our partners got the impression that it was impossible in the foreseeable historical perspective for our country to revive its economy, industry, defense industry, and armed forces to levels supporting the necessary strategic potential. And if that is the case, there is no point in reckoning with Russia's opinion. It is necessary to further pursue ultimate unilateral military advantage in order to dictate the terms in every sphere in the future. We ourselves are to blame, Putin said. All these years, the entire 15 years since the withdrawal of the United States from the anti-ballistic missile treaty, we have consistently tried to re-engage the American side in serious discussions in reaching agreements in the sphere of strategic stability. However, Putin observed the United States is permitting constant, uncontrolled growth of the number of anti-ballistic missiles, improving their quality and creating a new missile launch areas. And if we do not do something eventually, this will result in the complete devaluation of Russia's nuclear potential, meaning that all of our missiles could simply be intercepted. Getting to the end of the amount of time I have to read this. So, to those who in the past 15 years have tried to accelerate an arms race and seek unilateral advantage against Russia, we have introduced restrictions and sanctions that are illegal from the standpoint of international law, aiming to restrain our nation's development, including in the military area. I will say this: everything you have tried to prevent through such a policy has already happened. No one has managed to restrain Russia. Based upon the reaction to Putin's speech so far, the answer appears to be no. Sorry. Missed a key part. Putin spoke, and one would hope that throughout America, the modern-day incarnations of Horizon's Paul Marcarelli are making their way into the homes of every American citizen, and the halls of power where those the American people elect to represent them reside, and calling out, "Can you hear me now?" Based upon the reaction to Putin's speech so far, the answer appears to be no. This refusal to accept the fact that there exists today a new reality carries with it a potential for catastrophic miscalculation. In Pat Frank's 1959 novel, Alas, Babylon, an American Navy fighter aircraft flying over the Mediterranean Sea fires a missile that veers off target, striking an ammunition depot near the Syrian city of Latakia, setting off a massive explosion that the Soviet Union uses as an excuse to initiate a retaliatory nuclear strike against the United States. It doesn't take a stretch of the imagination today to paint a scenario in which the American and Russian forces clash over Syria. Indeed, a recent incident in which Syrian military forces, militia forces, supported by Russian private military contractors, advanced towards Syrian oil and gas fields occupied by US-backed Kurdish fighters, only to be attacked by American fighter bombers, resulting in hundreds of casualties, including scores of Russian dead, underscores the fact that such clashes are no longer theoretical. I'm not going to read the whole of this article, but you understand where this is going. The Russian nuclear policy was noted in the 2018 U.S. Nuclear Posture Review, which said the Russian strategy and doctrine emphasize the potential coercive and military uses of nuclear weapons. It mistakenly assesses that the threat of nuclear escalation or actual first use of nuclear weapons would serve to de-escalate a conflict on terms favorable to Russia. These mistaken perceptions increase the prospect for dangerous miscalculation and escalation. And yet we continue to ramp up this Russia narrative. we are painting them as the boogeyman when they are just responding to our constant threatening postures. No truer words could have been written, and yet the Trump administration seems in no hurry to undertake any actions vis-a-vis Russia that would reduce the possibility of any such miscalculation and escalation, while noting in the 2018 Nuclear Posture Review that arms can contribute to U.S. allied and partner security by helping to manage strategic competition among states. The Trump administration went on to declare that progress in arms control is not an end in and of itself, and depends on the security environment and the participation of willing partners. It was as if the entire history of U.S.-Russian arms control referred to by Putin in his State of the Nation address never happened. While not specifically naming Russia, the Trump administration put Moscow on notice that it must understand that there are no possible benefits from non-nuclear aggression or limited nuclear escalation. Potential adversaries must recognize that across the emerging range of threats and contexts, 1, the United States is able to identify them and hold them accountable for acts of aggression, including new forms of aggression. 2, we will defeat non-nuclear strategic attacks. And 3, any nuclear escalation will fail to achieve their objectives and will instead result in unacceptable consequences for them. The Russian president heard the message the United States was communicating. We are greatly concerned by certain provisions of the revised Nuclear Posture Review, Putin said, which expand the opportunities for reduce the threshold for the use of nuclear arms. Behind closed doors, one may say anything to calm down anyone, but we read what is written, and what is written is that this strategy can be put into action in response to conventional arms attacks and even to a cyber threat. Whatever Putin is, he ain't no dummy. And Putin has said some very interesting things in the last few years regarding what's going on in the state of the world, what's going on in the escalation of the Syria conflict, what's going on with the United States military-industrial complex, funding certain organizations. He's said some very interesting things over the last couple of years, and he knows what he's talking about. He knows more than our media is willing to admit. He is willing to state these things that we are not willing to state or admit. That's all I have for this video. Thank you so much for your eyes, your ears, and your conscience. If you would like to donate to this channel, you can do so at the links below. I hope to be back tomorrow with another video. Until next time, peace.